Going back and listening to the first part of the original story, Sal, I realized I was talking about a door when Sal gets to the cabin. And this door has a latch, a bolt, basically, and also a twisty latch, a lock on the inside. And I realized listening back to that it doesn't come across very clearly. So I just wanted to clear that up, that when he runs in, he slams the bolt, and then a few minutes later he realizes there's also a latch, so he flips it, and I just did not write that in very well, but since it already got published on the airways here, I just thought I would correct that instead of ignoring it. So tonight we're going to do part 2 of an original story called Sal, about a guy who was out looking for his girlfriend's missing son and got attacked by something out in the woods and stumbled upon this cabin that he didn't know was there. And while he was in there, the things that attacked him broke in and began speaking. And so that's where the story is going to pick up right here. Sal, the creature said in a deep, smooth voice. Inside the bathroom, Sal felt the urge to scream. Sal can't come to the phone right now, the creature said slowly. I'd be happy to take a message. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, why are you doing this? This doesn't make any sense. I want to talk to Whitemane, Mr. Carvey ordered. The creature laughed with genuine good humor. It was a deep, unnerving, animalistic sound. The fool you call Whitemane is dead, and the snows have come. It is time to hunt. The ogre crushed the phone easily in the palm of his hand and tossed it aside like he had the rifle. Then he lowered his head and leaned his thick shoulder against the door. Sal, he said quietly. Sal couldn't have responded if he wanted to. Sal, you're gonna die, the monster said. So you can either put your gun on the floor and open the door slowly, in which case we'll break your neck quickly, or you can make us come in after you. If we have to come in there, you will not have a bone or an organ intact by the time your spirit departs. So what do you think, Sal? The two creatures stood in the perfect silence of the evening for a long moment. Then the answer came. A gunshot rang out with deafening force, and the wooden door splintered as the bullet cut through and drove itself into the monster's neck. The wounded ogre roared viciously and stepped away from the door. He covered the bleeding wound in his neck with a large hand and shouted to his companion in a gruff, guttural language that Sal Moricelli never wanted to hear again. The bigger ogre approached the door, grabbed the tiny knob, and yanked the whole apparatus free of its hinges. Inside the tiny bathroom, Sal had very little to work with. He heard the roar. He heard the second creature approach. He felt it in his soul as the door tore loose. He was terrified, but in spite of the fear, or maybe because of it, he could see every detail before him in the dim light coming through the tiny window. He raised his revolver calmly, aimed at the creature's face as it ducked beneath the doorway, and squeezed the trigger. The gun kicked. He only saw the monster in front of him, falling backward, slinking toward the ground in a way that could only mean death, or at least an instant lack of consciousness. The ogre hit the floor with a thunderous bang, and Sal was already running, leaping over the body, hoping even as he set his sights on the ammo bag that the creature wasn't about to reach up and snap his legs off. He made it over the fallen monster without incident, scooped up his bag, and remembered an instant before the strap caught that it was attached by a little metal ringlet. Adrenaline and determination were his friends in that moment. He turned on the remaining creature, the one bleeding in the corner, and emptied his revolver into it. The monster howled in pain and stumbled to its knees. Sal didn't waste any time. He unhooked the carabiner smoothly and threw his bag over his shoulder. He ran for the open, destroyed window and leapt through it, landing awkwardly in the snow. He stumbled forward, found his footing, and began to run. He didn't see the third creature sitting on the roof of the cabin, but he heard it when it hit the ground and started running after him. Sal didn't really know where he was going, but he thought he might actually be running further away from the highway and from Jenny's house. That didn't slow him down. He'd seen the monsters move, and he didn't think he had much of a chance anyway. But he would be completely out of luck if he slowed down at all. He didn't even see the drop-off. At the bottom of the ditch, there were no pines to block the snow. It had collected unchecked, and when Sal hit the ground, he was buried beneath the wet powder. He tried to recover his wind, but all he could do was squirm and gasp. The snow closed in on him, but then the distinct thump of a massive body landing in the snow got his attention. Still struggling to breathe, both because he was only using an air pocket and due to the awkward landing, Sal forced himself to be as still as possible. 10 yards away, shin deep in the snow, the ogre who had waited on the roof scanned the little ravine and the frozen stream it held. The wounded ogre stopped at the top of the drop-off and slumped against a tree. He grunted something in that beastly language, and the other ogre looked up at him and answered. His voice was slightly higher pitched, and he certainly spoke more quickly. The wounded ogre, the obvious leader, growled something back down the steep slope, and his companion immediately reached over his head, grabbed the top of the ridge, and pulled himself back up with ease. Sal was left with silence, but he didn't dare move. It could be a trick to make him reveal himself. They could be legitimately searching somewhere else, but they might notice if he started stumbling around in the snow. So he lay there, unable to feel his face and hands, wondering how long he could stay there before frostbite set in. But it wasn't the cold that got him moving. It was the realization of why the monsters had moved on without looking for him. He sat up quickly, dug through the snow until he found both his gun and the bag of ammunition, and began the cold journey back to Jenny's house. Minutes later, standing on the shoulder of the highway, Sal felt the vague nervousness he'd been experiencing grow into excited fear. Even the sounds of wildlife had grown quiet as he moved closer to the house. His feet were in agony, and he couldn't feel his hands or his face, but he had a solid grip on the revolver. He was certain he would need it. Sal crossed the highway and began the long trek down the dirt driveway to the little miniature neighborhood where Jenny and her grandparents lived. Her parents' house was also there, though her dad had lost a battle with cancer before Sal had ever known her, and her mom had since remarried and moved to Washougal. They'd taken to renting that house to select tenants, usually people from church, but it had been unoccupied for about 6 months. There were 2 occupied homes in the little farm-like complex. One belonged to Jenny and her 9-year-old son. The thought of Robert brought a lump into Sal's throat, but he choked it down and kept pushing down the cleanly plowed driveway. The other house belonged to Jenny's widowed grandfather, the man he had been speaking to on the phone. There were no lights on at any of the 3 houses occupying the quarter-mile stretch of driveway. Fortunately, Jenny's house was the first one he would reach. The security light came on with blinding force. Sal shielded his eyes briefly with his free hand. He half expected a flutter of motion as something stalking him scurried away, but his imagination went unfulfilled. Instead, the light revealed something much, much worse. The front door was wide open. Sal ran without a thought. He jumped the porch stairs and skidded to a halt at the open door to stare at the blackness inside. His heart dropped to his stomach, but as he looked frantically around for any sign of what had happened, he found the note attached to the inside of the door with a magnet. "Sal," the note began, "we left the door open so you would know something is up. Pop won't tell me much, but he's terrified. We're going to Mom's for the night. Robert is okay. He wasn't taken. He was hiding in a tree. He saw you, but he was too scared of the monsters to show himself. I guess he finally got more scared of staying out there in the dark. He's with us. We're all safe. Get in your truck right now and join us in Washougal. I love you so much. Please be safe." Relief washed over him with each word. For Robert, for Jenny, for himself, his truck was 20 yards away. The keys were in his... Sal shoved his numb, free hand into his left pocket where he kept his keys. Nothing. He tried the other pocket, just in case. More nothing. He suddenly felt very exposed. He turned and jumped down the porch steps, nearly twisting his knee as his battered body protested. He scanned the driveway and the open snow-covered yard. There, under the light of the motion-sensing security lamp, he saw what had come to be familiar footprints. He had been foolish to think they belonged to a man of any size, but he'd been more concerned about Robert than encountering mythical creatures earlier. "Why do you want to kill me?" he demanded loudly. "We're hungry," a voice answered calmly from behind him. Sal whirled around only to find nothing there, but he could still hear labored animal breathing from somewhere nearby. Then it clicked. The house. Sal focused his attention on the open door, but tried not to lose track of his surroundings. Sal could tell it was the creature who had spoken to him at the cabin with that deep voice that wasn't quite human. The creature he unloaded a .357 into. That meant the remaining monster was out there somewhere. He seriously doubted it was also in the dark of the house. "Looks like they put you guys out of commission for a while," Sal argued. "What is this, some weird interspecies feud?" "Feud," the wounded creature laughed. "No one likes ogres, son. The Carveys just take it to an eccentric level." To Sal's left, something moved ever so slightly. just enough to draw his attention to the tractor shed. So there was the other monster. He hoped they hadn't picked up extra reinforcements. "Well," Sal said casually, "I'm not going to shoot what I can't see, so if you want to get my ammo used up, you're going to have to get adventurous." Sal actually heard the buzzing as something large hurtled through the air over his head. It came from the direction of the tractor shed and smashed into the security light high on its pole beside the driveway. Sal sighed as the yard went dark. "Well, that's a start," he admitted. The ogre inside the house roared, but that coldly rational part of Sal that had been in charge most of the evening guided his thoughts toward the shed. He aimed the gun, but didn't fire blindly. As he expected, some kind of shape was moving his way through the darkness. He fired once, then looked back to the front door. Nothing was coming. Even in his terror, he knew it might mean the first ogre was injured too badly to move quickly. He hoped that was true. The healthy creature had veered off to Sal's left, away from the house, but Sal could hear heavy footsteps rolling his way. There was nothing but open yard, followed by highway, followed by pine forest. The black shape of the ogre on the black background was invisible. Sal broke his word and fired twice at the level of his own chest. The muzzle flash blinded him even more. Then, struck by inspiration, he took off for the house. He dropped the ammunition bag. As he cleared the corner of the house, he could hear the ogre gaining ground. He knew he would never outrun it at any distance, so he took advantage of his head start, turned toward the house, and executed the most perfect baseball slide of his entire life. He kicked through the thin aluminum grate and slid smoothly under the house, dragging a pile of snow with him. He lay there stunned that he hadn't smashed into the cinder blocks at the foundation of the house, until a massive hairy arm slammed through the opening, and fingers the size of two of his own nicked the wild mass of his sweaty, messed-up hair. Sal scrambled away in panic and drove his face into an aluminum air duct. He fell prone again, terrified but uninjured. The ogre stuck its large, flat face against the opening and roared. "If I have to tear this house down," it said. The menace was heightened by the dull echo of the space under the house. "I'll do it." "Is that supposed to make me give up and crawl out? Start tearing away, big guy." The ogre's face disappeared, and Sal immediately began crawling toward the opening, but at an angle that would place him beside it. The massive arm reached inside one more time and felt around, but Sal was well out of reach. Then the arm withdrew. A dim square of moonlight shone through the opening. Then that square disappeared. If Sal was wrong, he would die. If he gambled right, it was his only chance to live. Sal rolled to his right until he was in front of the opening. He could barely see the one eye looking in at him, and before the monster could figure out what was happening, Sal unloaded the cylinder into the ogre's face. Just outside, he could hear the creature's pained breathing, which quickly turned into a frantic gurgle. Sal gave it a few moments. The wet breathing slowed, but it never died away. If there hadn't been at least one more of those things out there, he would have just lain there all night despite the cold. Getting out at an upward angle was a lot harder than getting in had been. The rough concrete tore at his frozen hands as he tried to shimmy back into the night. Finally, he had twisted and kicked until he was on his back and 3/4 of the way out of the gap. Something growled right in his ear. Sal's heart jumped hard and his legs began kicking involuntarily. He backed away and rolled over twice before kicking backward again even more. He was several yards away before he realized he was looking at the ogre that had tried to get under the house. It lay on its back, looking at him with a sneer on what remained of its face. The right eye had been destroyed, and apparently a second shot had struck it just above the mouth. It took in a long but shallow breath and exhaled a stream of vapor that bounced off the snowy ground. Sal struggled to find his feet, and he watched the monster for a brief moment. It took a few more breaths, but it didn't come after him. It didn't even move. Satisfied it wasn't going anywhere, Sal moved back to the front of the house, making sure to stay clear of the dying creature's reach. He saw his bag of ammunition in the middle of the yard, half buried in snow. Despite his body's protest, especially his feet, he ran for it. He was closing in, close enough to reach out for it. Then, out of nowhere, a massive shape rushed into view. The wounded ogre, the one that had been speaking to him, grabbed the bag and flung it into the night. The bag ripped, and .357 Magnum shells sprayed everywhere as the fabric disappeared into the darkness. Sal was stunned, but the big creature closed in on him and swiped for his head. Sal ducked low out of pure instinct. He was confident the blow would have literally taken his head off. He was turning to see what was going on, but the creature, whose momentum had taken him a step past Sal, turned faster and got a hand the size of Sal's head around his throat. Given any time at all, he would have crushed Sal, but Sal lashed out with his gun hand blindly, and the weapon's grip struck one of the monster's wounds. The creature dropped him and covered its throbbing abdomen. It dropped down to its knees and slumped over. While the ogre was still howling in pain, Sal closed the small gap between them. And began pounding the creature's wounded neck. The monster fell over onto the snowy ground. Sal followed him to the ground, still beating on his neck, until fresh blood squirted all over his hands and shirt. The open wound began to steam in the frigid night air. Sal rolled away, and the ogre flailed his arms helplessly, but he couldn't muster enough force to do anything. Sal shrugged off the blows and separated himself from the monster. He took a step back and looked the thing over. The ogre just lay there on its side, coughing, breathing, in animalistic huffs. "It looks," the creature began, but he had to cough. "It looks like you killed me at the cabin," he choked out. Sal reached down into the snow and picked up one of the fallen cartridges. "It looks that way," he agreed as he opened the cylinder and loaded the magnum. The ogre turned his head just enough to look him in the eye. It didn't faze Sal a bit. He closed the cylinder, aimed carefully at the monster's head, and squeezed the trigger one last time.